Okay, so the last halacha we saw was Reish Ayin Vav Sif Tes. Now, just one side point I'll mention about Reish Ayin Vav Sif Tes, since, as we said, it's a tremendous sugya that has complete svarim written on it, that one Sif in Shulchan Aruch. So I felt that it would be unfair not to, discuss it a drop. So I'll just mention one very, very minor or very major point, and that is regarding the Isser of Mechikas Hashem. There is a question. Let's say you have the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, for example, and the Hey is a little too thick, so you want to thin it out. Okay, so the hay weighs 100 pounds. You want to take off 2 pounds, shave it down to 98 pounds, right? So you're still going to have a Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Yud Kei Vav Kei was there the whole time. When you take off the little bit that you want to take off, Yud Kei Vav Kei will remain, and at no point was there any mechika, as it were, of the Shem Hashem. So is that mutter or is that aser? So this is a three-way machlekes amongst the achreinim. The Ramami Panu, he holds that it's an Isser D'Oraisa to do such a thing. Why would it be an Isser D'Oraisa? Because we're familiar with the concept of Chetzi Shir Asim Minat Torah. You find, for instance, by Yom Kippur, that the Isser of eating on Yom Kippur is to eat a kaiseves. A kaiseves is, I think, around the size of a date. So what if you eat a half a date? Is it mutter to eat a half a date on Yom Kippur? So the answer is it's aser. Not only is it aser, it's an Isser D'Oraisa. What do you mean it's an Isser D'Oraisa? I thought you only get kares if you eat a kaiseves. The Torah says you're right. You only get kares if you eat a kaiseves, but that doesn't mean it's mutter to eat less than a kaiseves. To eat less than a kaiseves and Isser D'Oraisa. So the Rami Panu says same thing over here. The Isser D'Oraisa is to erase the Shem Hashem, but to erase part of a letter of a Shem Hashem is Chetzi Shir, and that's also aser min hatayu. That's what the Rami Panu says. The Neiv Yehuda disagrees. And he says that we just learned yesterday that there's an Isser D'Rabbanan. Well, first of all, he disagrees with the Rami Panu Bechlal. He says that's not called Chetzi Shir Asim Minat Torah. Chetzi Shir is when there's a shear. So the shear is a kaiseves. So Chetzi Shir is Aser also, right? You only get kares if you do the shear. He says over here, by Mechikas Hashem, there's no shear. Either you erased the Shem or you didn't erase the Shem. So did you or didn't you? It's a yes or no question. There's no, Chetzi Shir is not an option, Neiv Yehuda says. But Neiv Yehuda says something else. We learned yesterday that there's something called nitfalin. Let's say you have the word Elokim is the Shem Hashem. Elokeichem, the Chaf Mem, is nitfalin. And we saw yesterday that there's an Isser D'Rabbanan to erase nitfalim. Now, says Neiv Yehuda, nitfalim are not part of a Shem Hashem, it's a suffix. And yet we say it's an Isser D'Rabbanan because it has shaykhs to the Shem Hashem. So says Neiv Yehuda, well, this can't be better than that, right? If it's also to erase nitfalim, which are not even part of the Shem Hashem, so here, where I'm shaving down a hay that's actually part of the Shem Hashem, that can't be better. So that also has to be, at least, says Neiv Yehuda, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. That's Shita number 2. Shita number 3 is the Maral Mi Prague and the Minchas Chinuch and the Pri Megadim, that they hold that it's Heter Gomer. You're allowed to do it. Why? Because you're not erasing Shem Hashem. So either you erase the Shem Hashem, you didn't erase the Shem Hashem, period. It's a yes or no question, and the answer is yes, you're allowed to do it. Now, that said, I'm not saying that the Maral recommends walking around taking off parts of Shemus. But technically, theoretically, if somebody needed or wanted to do such a thing, he would not be over an Isser D'Oraisa, nor would he be over an Isser D'Rabbanan. So that's just a word about Sif Tes. Let's chip off a piece of stone from the base of the Mikdash. It's an Isser D'Oraisa. That's an Isser D'Oraisa. Yeah, but that's because that's part of the Mizbeach, and that's the Isser. Over here, the Isser is Mechikas Hashem. Over there, the Isser is not destroying the Mizbeach. Over there, the Isser is to take off even part of it. It is learned from the same pasuk, but this is also, it's a v'nitatztem es mizbechaisam, it's a hemshich of the pasuk. The Taz wants to say that if you want to drill a stender into the wall of a shul, that would be an Isser D'Oraisa, because of this halacha, the Taz wants to say. Okay, we move on to Sif Yud. Kosav Kel Me'elekim. Let's say you wrote, now, I don't know if you noticed or not, but the word Elokim is really a double shame. How is it a double shame? Because Elikim is a shame. But let's say you only wrote the first two letters. Kel, Aleph Lamed. That's also a shame, right? So Kasav Kel Me Elikim. You were about to write Elikim. So you're writing a mezuzah. You wrote Shema Yisrael, Hashem, Elikenu. You're up to the word Elikenu, and you wrote Aleph Lamed. So that's this case. Kasav Kel Me Elikim. Ka Me Hashem. Or you're writing Shema Yisrael Hashem. So you wrote Shema Yisrael Yud Kei. You haven't yet finished the shame. Oy shekasav shame ka. Or you actually are writing the shame Yud K. Which, mind you, these shames were not listed in the list of Kale was, but Yud K was not listed in the list of shames before that are an Isser to erase. So Einay Nimchak. L'maisa, these are usher to erase because Kel and Ka in and of themselves are a Shem Hashem. So even though you were writing a different shame, but once you wrote the first letters, which themselves are a shame, the Isser Mechika is Chal. Aval Shin Daled Mishakai. Let's say you're writing on the back of the mezuzah, we know you have the word Shakai that appears. So you haven't yet written the Yud, you just wrote the Shin and the Daled. And then you say, oh man, I wrote it in the wrong spot. So you want to erase it, which happens to be a pretty common scenario. So you're allowed to erase it. That's the halacha. Tzadi Beis Mitzvokes, same thing would apply. Let's say you wrote the Tzadi Beis, you were about to write the Shem Tzvokes, and you realized, oh no, I skipped the line. So that's okay. You can erase the Tzadi and the Beis. Nimchakim. That's mutter. Hagah, says the Ramah, L'chein Aleph Daled Me Adnus, right? You have the Shem Aleph Daled. So if you only wrote the Aleph Daled, you would be allowed to erase it. Oy Aleph Hey Me Ekya. Yesterday we discussed Ekya Asher Ekya, right? Oy Aleph Hey Me Ekya. So those would also be mutter b'mechika according to this first day in the Ramah. But Yesh Machmirun B'zeh. There are those that say that no, that the Isser applies to Kel, Ka, and Aleph Daled, and Aleph Hey. In other words, they agree that the Shin Daled of Shakai and the Tzadi Beis of Tzvokos would be mutter b'mechika, but this second opinion disagrees and says that the Aleph Daled and the Aleph Hey would be Osir. The reason explained by the Neisei Kalim is because those represent Yud Kei Vav Kei. You know, Tzvokos and Shakai are shameless in and of themselves, whereas Adnus and Ekya are like another way of saying the Shem HaEtzem. Okay, these things are beyond my comprehension, but that's what they explain the pshat is. Now you're all familiar. When we were growing up, today I don't think it's so common anymore. But in the Sidurim they used to write Shnei Yudim, Ba'achas al Gabein, right? You'd have by the brachos Baruch Atah Hashem. So it would say instead of Yud Kei Vav Kei, it would say Yud Yud, right? With a little what's called a shtrichel al Gabein. So sometimes they had 3 Yudin, and sometimes they had 2 Yuds and a Shtrichel. Sometimes they had a Yud, 2 Shtrichelch, and a Yud. There's all different. Sometimes no Shtrichel. Sometimes just 2 Yuds. Yeah. So there are those that explain that the 2 Yuds and the Shtrichel is Yud, and the Shtrichel is like a Vav. So Yud and Vav is 26, which is the Shem Hashem. That's okay. Be that as it may. Are you allowed to erase these 2 Yudin in a Siddur? So mutter l'machkai. That's mutter b'mechika. Why? Because it's not a Shem Hashem. But it's only mutter in mulat tzarech. Now, like I was saying, you shouldn't walk around erasing things that represent a Shem Hashem. That's inappropriate. But technically speaking, it's mutter b'mechika.
The Zohar says that the first yud is from Yud Kei Vav Kei, the second yud is from Adam.
Now there is a shayla I just mentioned parenthetically. What about? It's very common. If somebody wants to write a Shem Hashem, but they don't want to write the Shem Hashem, so they'll make a dash or a hyphen in between the letters of the Shem. So they'll write Yud, dash, Hey, dash, Vav, dash, Hey. So is that mutter b'mechika? Is that a Shem Hashem or is that not a Shem Hashem? So some places can say it's mutter b'mechika because it's not a Shem Hashem. However, the Avnei Nezer, and I saw this brought b'Shem Rav Moshe Feinstein as well, they say it's also b'mechika, which is interesting because they say that a hyphen is actually meant to connect. It's not meant to separate, right? When you have a hyphenated word, right? So a hyphenated word is the pshat that these 2 words are connected, That's what the hyphen is telling you, which technically speaking, if you want to get into real nitty gritty, then it would depend if it's a dash or a hyphen. A dash is meant to separate. A hyphen is meant to connect. But I don't think Ramosha and the Avnei Nezer really care that much if it's a hyphen or a dash. I think that their point is that since when you see it, you recognize that it's there, indicating that this is one word. So Mamela, it's Aser, even though it's there because I want to separate the Yud from the Hey, and I want to separate the Hey from the Vav, but the dash is showing me that it's one word at the end of the day. If it was two words, I wouldn't need a dash, right? When you have he went to the store, so I don't have a dash between the words to tell me that it's two separate words. I know it's two separate words, so why is there a dash here? The reason there's a dash here is because you're telling me that this Yud is connected to this Hey, and this Hey is connected to this Vav. So in Mela, they hold that would also be Aser b'Mechika.
No, but what about when you're writing the Shem Elokim?
You have to write a kuf. If you
Elokim, like what?
No, you can write Elokim.
But the Aleph Lam is Miskadish.
So they say, it's a very good question. They answer as follows: that since you're not writing the Shem Hashem, you're writing Elokim. So since you're writing Elokim, so the Aleph Lamed are not Niskadish, because since I'm putting a kuf there, I'm writing the Aleph Lamed al Das to make a kuf and not a Hey. So the Paiskim say that the Aleph Daled would be the Aleph Lamed would be mutter b'mechika also. Masha Enkein, if I'm writing Aleph Lamed and then a Hey Yud and a Mem, then the Aleph Lamed would be also b'mechika. That's this halacha.
Aleph dash.
Even without the dash.
More serious.
Even without the Aleph dash Lamed Hey Yud Mem would be also b'mechika, but Aleph Lamed Kuf Yud Mem would be mutter b'mechika. Yeah, that's what the Paiskim say halacha l'maisa. Yes, I happen to be bothered like you are, and when I write it backwards to try and avoid that problem. But they hold that it's mutter because once the kuf is there,
make the old-fashioned Aleph Lamed in one piece, like
that would be also b'mechika also because this is a very, very important yesod to understand. And that is that there's two separate things in the world. There's Hilchas Stam, and then there's one of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah is Mechikas Hashem. It's one of the 365 lavin in the Torah is Mechikas Hashem. Now the Isser of Mechikas Hashem happens sometimes to overlap with Hilchas Stam, but Hilchas Stam has nothing to do with Hilchas Mechikas Hashem. So Hilchas Mechikas Hashem tells us that there's an Isser to erase Hashem Hashem, period. In other words, if you make a hyphen or a dash in a Sefer Torah, your Sefer Torah is possible. But that has nothing to do with anything, because the Isser of Mechikas Hashem, if you have a person who's bored at night and he takes a can of spray paint and climbs onto the side of the mountain on the side of the highway and spray paints Yud Kei Vav Kei on the side of the mountain, that's also b'mechika. But it's possible for a Sefer Torah. Teretz is because Hilchas Stam has nothing to do with Hilchas Mechikas Hashem. So the Aleph and the Lamed together, it's a psul in Hilchas Stam, but it's Hashem Hashem. Anything that's read as Hashem Hashem is an Isser of Mechikas Hashem. That's why the space would be a heter, because it's not read as Hashem Hashem. I have a letter in center field somewhere that has nothing to do with the word next to it. So that would be a heter, because that works for Hilchas Stam and for Mechikas Hashem. Okay, Halacha Yud Aleph. Nidbika ois lechaberta. Now this is a Hilchas Stam halacha. Let's say you have Yud Kei Vav Kei, and two of the letters are touching each other. Now we remember, I'm sure you all remember from Siman Lamed Beis, that in Aruch that you can't have two letters touching each other. If you have two letters in a Sefer Torah that are touching each other, it's puzzle. So what if you have a Shem Hashem and there are two letters touching each other? And again, we're talking about in Sefer Torah, Tefillin, or Mezuzahs. If on the side of the mountain two letters are touching each other, there wouldn't be a heter to separate them, because what's the heter to separate them? They're fine as they are. But in a Sefer Torah, you do have the heter, as we're about to see. Why? Because it's a tikkun, right? You are allowed to separate it. Why? Says the Ber HaGoyla in Tes Vav. Take a look in the Ber HaGoyla on the side. He explains, this is the Torah, Midivrei Tshuvas Aviv Harash, Klal Gimel, V'amar Tasham Menachas, V'kasav Afal Pi, Dazhar L'moichek Shem, Miloi Sassen Kain, HaTikun Hu. Say, even though there's an Issa D'Oraisa, so what's your head there? If it was the side of a mountain, it wouldn't be mutter. But since we're talking about a Sefer Torah, ha-tikkun, this is a tikkun. And since it's a tikkun, so Mamela, it's mutter. The Gra in Sifkat and Chafei says the same thing. Nidbaka kein lamdu mehasher kosev ha'ga diyai v'hu mesechas seifrim. So that we're going to see in the Hemshech over here, the Gaon is saying that this din is learned from the Mesechus Seifrim that the Ramah is about to quote. And what's that? Diyai shenishbecha al Hashem. Let's say you have a Shem Hashem and ink spilled on it. So mutter lemochka. It's mutter to erase the spillage. Kidei letaknei. The reason is because you're fixing. Fixing is mutter. The ein zederech mechika. The isser of mechikas Hashem is only when you're out to destroy. Right? You see a Shem Hashem and you want to destroy it. So derech mechika is aser. But rak derech tikkun, but when you're doing it to fix it, then it would be mutter. Chaktoiches depends. You only have a problem with chaktoiches when you have what's called a shinui tzura, and that's the next case. Let's just see the next case, and then you'll see your chaktoiches case.
That you brought about shaving down the O's.
Yeah. So some say that it would be mutter because that's called a tikkun, and others say that no, that's not called a tikkun. Correct. Right, they know there are places that are mechalik between liyapos and letaken. Heishel shem shekaran. So this is your case, Gershon. Heishel shem shekaran agas begaga. Let's say you wrote yud k vav k, and the leg of the hay is touching the roof. Right. Look at any of the hays here on the page in front of you. You'll see that a hay is more or less like a reish or a dalid, and then there's what's called a nakuda inside the hay. So let's say that nakuda is touching the gag of the hay. So that in the Sefer Torah passels the Sefer Torah, passels the hay. So what do you do? And we're talking about Hashem Hashem, where there's an Isim Mechikas Hashem. So mamish nearest keches, if it's touching to the degree that this hay no longer looks like a hay, it looks like a ches, mutter limchayk ligra haregel uletakna. So then it's mutter b'mechika. Why? Because you don't have a yud kei vav kei anymore. You have a yud kei vav ches. No isser to erase a ches. Aval im negeh rak ma'at. But if it's touching just a bit, yesh l'sapek b'davar mutter. So what's the suffix? The suffix is because once it's touching, according to some paiskim, if I'm going to erase it, that's chak teiches. I'm kashering my hay. My hay was puzzle. And now I'm kashering it. That's chak teiches, because why is it a psul? It's a psul because it's an intrinsic psul. And as when you have two letters that are touching each other, generally speaking, it's not chak teiches, because each of the two letters stands on its own, and just separating them is removing a technical psul to the Sefer Torah. Chak teiches is when I have more than a technical psul. I have an intrinsic psul. This hay that's touching the gag is an intrinsic psul, and that's a negias oisel atzma. Negias oisel atzma, that is a psul, and that when you erase it, according to some paiskim, that would be chak teiches. That's why you're in a bind. I can't erase a little bit because it's going to be chak teiches. I can't erase a lot because that's stam mechikas Hashem. I can read a shame over here. Yud beis hakoisef Yehuda. Let's say you are writing Yehuda. Now, what was this is very, very crucial, which the Mechaber leaves out. What was the guy thinking, the Sefer thinking when he wrote it? So we're talking about a case where he was thinking that he's writing Yehuda. Okay, so he's writing the pasuk Vayomer Yehuda. Okay, so he's writing Yehuda v'loy nasan ba dalid, but he was spacing out and he missed out the dalid. And now he's looking at his pasuk and he's like, hey, that doesn't say Vayomer Yehuda. That says Vayomer Hashem. What to do? Says the Mechaber, no big deal, take it easy. Yitle hadalid lemala. Right? You hang the dalid up between the lines, right? We discussed the idea of the tliyas. So over here, the tliya is mutter. It's mechikas Hashem. Why is it mutter to be toilet the dalid? Peretz is because he didn't have intent to write the Shem Hashem. If somebody writes the Shem Hashem without intending to write the Shem Hashem, there's no Isser Mechika. Because now it reads Yehuda. So that's a Shaila of Mechikas Hashem. Now, let's say you have Kale. Very good. So the Chidah clears your Shaila. For instance, let's say you have the word Kale, and you have Nakudas. You have a Siddur, and it says Kale, right? So you have an Aleph with a Tseirei underneath it, and a lamed, right? And I come with my pen and I make one dot. And now it doesn't say kale anymore, it says L. Is that Mechikas Hashem? So the Chidah declares that Shaila, some want to say it's an Isidir Rabbanon, but over here, where it's changing the reading of the word, so there's a much stronger tzad to say, now it kashes the Sefer Torah. Previously it said Yud Kei Vav Kei, now it says Yehuda, it's a kosher Sefer Torah. So it's a Shaila of Mechikas Hashem, but the reason why it's mutter is because, what the Mechaber didn't mention, when he was writing the word, he was Mechaven to write Yehuda. So if a Sefer is mechaven to write something else and accidentally Hashem came out, there's no Isser Mechika, you could erase it. I get this call sometimes from Seferim that this happened to them. They forgot to put in a Dalet, or they forgot that they were writing Hashem at all. They're just copying, totally spacing out, and then they look at the paper and, oh my goodness, there's Hashem there. So there's no Isser Mechika in such a case. This person has to know that he's writing Hashem. That's why the guy who spray paints on the side of the mountain, Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? Or the guy who tattoos Yud Kei Vav Kei onto him, over there they're doing it the kavanah. They know that they're writing Hashem. That's an Issa D'Oraisa to erase.
The Tliya is only for the lazy man.
Correct, right. He could erase it. Yeah, there are those, in the Seches Seferim, it says not to erase it because of Marazayin. But Lamaisa, we're knowing that we do erase it. Hayalai Liftev Hashem, because of Yehuda. Hey Midalit. Now let's say you have the opposite case. He was supposed to write Yud Kei Vav Kei, and he intended to write Yud Kei Vav Kei, but accidentally somehow the word Yehuda came out. So what to do? So what you do is you turn the Dalit into a Hey, and now you have Yud Kei Vav Kei Hey, right? Umayche Kei Achreina, and then you just erase the last Hey. That's the way you fix that. Yud Gimel. Kli shehayakasav olav shem, because there's a hefsek of a dalid between, you have Yud Kei Vav Dalid Hey. So even if he was mekadosh the last Hey, it has no kedusha because there's a hefsek between it and the Vav. So what do? You turn the dalid into a Hey. Now I have Yud Kei Vav Kei. The last Hey is ibrik, right? It's extra. Get rid of it. Kli shehayakasav olav shem. Let's say you have a toothbrush that has a Shem Hashem written on it. You see this, cute thing on Amazon, and it comes to your house, and what do you know? The toothbrush has on it a Shem Hashem.
Seal.
The seal of?
Columbia University. It's a Shem Hashem.
Okay, so let's say you're a Columbia graduate, and they give you a T-shirt in honor of your graduation. So what do you do with that T-shirt that has the Yud Kei Vav Kei on it? Koitzitz Makam Hashem V'Ganza. You cut out. Right, so if it's a wooden table, let's say, right? So you bring a carpenter, you cut out the area of the Shem Hashem, and you put it into Geniza. Hagah, v'aser lifta. This is discussed, by the way, as a tshuva from the Chavas Yoreh. Talks about rings. They used to have a signet ring, right, that would have a Shem Hashem on it. It's not uncommon to have kalim that have a Shem Hashem on it. So that's what you do. You cut it out. Now, you can't walk around using a cane or a walking stick or a signet ring. It's a bizayin to the Shem Hashem to just have Shemas floating around. And that's what he's about to say over here. If you're writing a Sefer and you want to write the Shem Hashem, that's fine. But if you're going to just write a Shem Hashem in random places, you're not allowed to do that. The Yuchal Love Elidei Bizayin. So if you give a guy a T-shirt with the Shem Hashem on it, that's going to come to Bizayin, right? You're putting it in the washing machine together with other unpleasant things, and therefore you're not allowed to do that. And therefore, if you're sending someone a letter, right, you should not write in the letter the Shem Hashem. V'yesh nizharim afilu b'milas shalom. And there are some that are so careful about this that they won't even write the Shem Shalom, Shaloi Ligmar Ksivasinos. They're careful that they'll write Shin Lamed Vav Shtrichel. They won't complete the Shem Hashem. Why? Because the Shem Hashem is also, it represents one of the Shemas. However, the Shach in Sifkat and Tev Zayin says, V'roiv ha'olam ein nizharim b'zeh. Most people are not careful about this. In other words, they do write the Shem Shalom. V'chein kasav b'tshuvas harosh d'muter. Now, if you ever noticed, Rabbi Yashiv, when he would sign letters, his name was Yosef Shalom, and he would write Shin Lamed Vav with a shtrichel. He would not complete, he was makbid for this halacha and Shulchan Aruch, but I think it's safe to say, like the Ramah says, that most people are not particularly careful about this.